Days in the mountains had a rhythm of their own. The mornings came early with soft sunlight touching the peaks, and evenings arrived quietly, wrapping the world in a blue calm. Emily had begun to adjust to this slower life. She woke up each day to the sound of birds and spent her mornings making tea, reading, or walking near the river. The air always smelled of pine and wet earth, and sometimes that alone felt like healing. But even though her days were peaceful, her heart still carried a quiet emptiness. It was strange, she thought, how you could leave a place but still feel the weight of it inside you. Sometimes she caught herself remembering her old life, dinners where she sat across from Daniel in silence, the feeling of waiting for affection that never came, the nights she cried quietly so he wouldn't hear. She wondered if something had been wrong with her all along. Maybe she just didn't know how to be a good wife. Maybe she never had. One afternoon, she went to the general store in town to buy some groceries. As she walked in, she spotted Caleb talking with the store owner near the counter. He was holding a sack of flour and laughing at something the old man had said. It was the kind of laughter that filled the room, warm and unforced. Emily hesitated for a second, then smiled and nodded when he noticed her. "Well, look who's learning mountain life," Caleb said, walking over. "Getting the hang of shopping without a list?" "Barely," she said, laughing softly. "I keep forgetting what I came for." "That's the best part," he replied. "Means you're finally slowing down." They talked for a few minutes, and when she mentioned that she was planning to make soup that evening, he said, "You'll need better carrots than those. Try the ones old Mrs. Tucker sells down by the farm road, fresh from the ground." "I'll do that," she said. "You really know everyone around here, don't you?" "Been here all my life," he answered. "The mountains teach you to know people and to respect their space." Something about that last sentence stayed in her mind. Respecting space. Maybe that was something she had never known before. Someone giving her room to breathe instead of telling her who to be. Over the next few weeks, their paths kept crossing, sometimes by accident, sometimes not. Caleb would stop by to check if her fence needed repair or to drop off something from town. She began baking small treats in return, muffins, pies, or warm bread. He would thank her and leave, never staying long, but always leaving behind a quiet comfort that lingered long after he was gone. One day, Emily found herself painting again. She had once loved painting, soft landscapes and skies, but had stopped years ago when Daniel said it was a waste of time. That afternoon, with the sound of wind in the trees and sunlight streaming through her window, she picked up a brush. She didn't plan anything. She just painted what she saw: the blue-gray mountains, the trees, and a small cabin by the river. When she stepped back, she realized the cabin looked a lot like Caleb's. The next morning, she carried the painting to his place, shy but smiling. His dog barked happily as she knocked on the door. Caleb opened it, surprised to see her holding a canvas. "What's this?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "A gift," she said, handing it to him, "for helping me so much. It's not perfect, but—" He interrupted gently, studying the painting. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "You made this?" She nodded. He smiled, running his fingers lightly along the frame. "You've got a good eye for the mountains. You see them the way they really are, quiet but alive." His words warmed her heart. "I haven't painted in years," she admitted. "I guess I stopped believing I was good at anything." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's not true," he said quietly. "Sometimes people just forget who they are because someone else convinced them to." She lowered her eyes. "Maybe." Caleb leaned against the doorway, the sunlight catching the edges of his hair. "If painting makes you feel alive again, then that's what you should do. Don't let anyone take that from you." His words stayed with her that night. She lay awake, listening to the wind rustling through the pines. There was something healing in the way he spoke, never pushing, never asking for more than she could give. It was as if he understood silence better than anyone else. One evening, she invited him over for dinner. It wasn't planned, it just happened. She had made soup, and when she saw him walking by her gate with his dog, she called out, "You look like you could use a hot meal." He laughed. "I won't say no to that." They sat together at the small wooden table, sharing soup and bread. The fire crackled softly in the corner. For a while, they talked about simple things: the weather, the trails, the stubbornness of his old truck. But then, as the night deepened, their conversation grew quieter. Caleb looked at her gently and said, "You seem lighter lately, happier." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I am. It feels strange and like I'm remembering how to be myself. That's a good thing, he said. People forget that happiness isn't about always smiling. It's about feeling safe enough to stop pretending. Her eyes met his and something inside her shifted. She wanted to say thank you, but the words didn't feel enough. Instead, she said softly, I used to think I was the problem in my marriage, that I didn't know how to be the kind of wife he wanted. Caleb's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. Maybe you weren't the problem, he said quietly. Maybe you were just trying to love someone who didn't know how to love you back. His words hit her heart like gentle rain, soft but deep. For a moment, she couldn't speak. No one had ever said that to her before. She looked down, blinking back tears she hadn't meant to shed. Caleb didn't move closer, didn't reach for her hand. He just sat there, letting her have that moment. His silence was not distance. It was respect. After a while, she whispered, I don't even know if I believe in love anymore. He smiled faintly. That's okay. Love doesn't need you to believe in it right away. It just waits quietly until you do. That night after he left, Emily stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The sky was wide and endless, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel small beneath it. She felt part of something, a world that was patient enough to let her heal. Days passed, and their bond grew naturally, like roots finding the right soil. Sometimes they walked together through the forest. Sometimes they didn't see each other for days. But even when they were apart, she felt his presence, in the calm he had taught her to find within herself. One morning, as she painted by the window, she realized something simple yet powerful. She was no longer thinking about her past every day. The memories were still there, but they no longer controlled her. She smiled at her reflection in the glass, a woman learning to breathe again, one quiet step at a time. And somewhere deep in the forest, Caleb was smiling too, though she didn't know it. He had seen that spark return to her eyes, the same spark the mountains had when sunlight touched their peaks after a long storm. Neither of them said it out loud, but both understood something quietly growing between them. Not rushed, not forced, but real. The kind of connection that didn't ask for promises, only presence, and though Emily didn't realize it yet, that simple friendship built on trust and kindness was already teaching her the first lesson of love, that it doesn't demand perfection. It just asks for truth. The sound of the bus faded behind Emily as she stood on the dusty road, a suitcase in her hand and the mountains stretching endlessly before her. The air was thin and cold, yet it felt fresher than anything she had breathed in years. She looked around at the quiet valley, where a few wooden houses stood like secrets between the trees. Her heart felt heavy but also strangely free. After years of trying to fix something that was already broken, she had finally left the city, and her marriage on behind. The cabin she had rented was small, sitting at the edge of a pine forest. It looked peaceful from the outside, but inside it carried the silence of an empty life waiting to be lived. She dropped her bags and sat on the creaky wooden floor, staring at the sunlight dancing on the walls. For the first time in years, there was no one calling her name, no phone buzzing, no demands. She thought she would feel lonely. Instead, she just felt tired. Tired from trying so hard to be someone's perfect wife and never being enough. Her ex-husband, Daniel, had been a good man in many ways, polite, hardworking, and respected. But he had never really seen her. Their house had been quiet not because of peace, but because of distance. He loved his work, his schedule, his order. She had tried to fit into that world, cooking the right meals, keeping everything neat, learning his moods. But somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. When she left, he didn't try to stop her. He had simply said, "If that's what you need." Those words had echoed in her mind for weeks. Now here she was, standing in front of her little cabin in the mountains, trying to figure out what she needed. The first few days passed in quiet routines. She unpacked, cleaned, and learned how to light the old fireplace. The wind outside sang through the pine trees, and at night she listened to it like a lullaby. The locals were friendly, though distant. They nodded when they saw her in the small general store, curious about the new woman who had come from the city. She didn't explain much. She only said she wanted peace. One afternoon, while trying to fix a broken water line outside the cabin, Emily realized she had no idea what she was doing. The pipe was old, the wrench too heavy, and the water had started leaking faster. She sighed, kneeling in the dirt, her hands cold and wet. Just then she heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. "Need some help there, ma'am?" a deep voice asked. She turned quickly. Standing a few feet away was a tall man with sunburned skin, dark hair, and calm gray eyes. He wore a flannel shirt and carried a small toolbox. A friendly-looking dog stood beside him, wagging its tail. "I think so," Emily stammered, embarrassed. "I thought I could fix this, but it seems I made it worse." The man smiled slightly. "Happens to the best of us. Mind if I take a look?" She nodded, stepping aside. He knelt down, studying the pipe with quiet focus. His movements were steady, unhurried, like someone who had spent his whole life working with his hands. Within minutes he had the leak stopped. "There," he said, tightening the wrench one last time. "That should hold until you get a new seal." Emily blinked, surprised. "Thank you. I've been here less than a week and already I've managed to break something." He chuckled softly. "Mountain living takes some learning." "I'm Caleb, Emily," she said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. He tipped his head toward the forest. "If you need tools or help again, I live down the trail, about half a mile east. You'll see smoke from my chimney most days." After he left, Emily stood there for a long time, watching the spot where he had disappeared into the trees. There was something about his calmness that unsettled her, not in a bad way, but in a way that made her realize how long it had been since someone had spoken to her kindly, without expecting anything in return. Over the next week, she saw Caleb a few more times, at the general store, on the trail, or passing by with his dog. Each time he greeted her with a quiet smile. Sometimes they exchanged only a few words, sometimes a small conversation. He was a man of few sentences, but every word seemed to carry weight. The locals called him the Mountain Man, not out of mockery but respect. He lived alone, worked with wood, and helped anyone who asked. Emily began to look forward to those small encounters more than she wanted to admit. His presence had a strange peace to it. He didn't ask about her past or her reasons for coming. He simply treated her like she belonged there, even though she still felt like a stranger to herself. One evening, while walking near the river, she saw Caleb chopping wood in front of his cabin. He looked up when she approached, a smile tugging at his lips. "Evening," he said. "You getting used to mountain life?" "Trying to," she replied. "Still learning how not to break things." He laughed, a low, warm sound. "That's part of the charm. Everything breaks at some point. What matters is learning how to fix it." The way he said it made her pause. For a moment she wondered if he was still talking about pipes and tools. After that day they began to share more moments, short ones, simple ones. He helped her fix the fence behind her cabin. She brought him coffee in return. They talked about small things, the weather, the forest, the way the air smelled before it rained. She found herself laughing again, not loudly, but in small bursts that felt real. One afternoon, while helping her carry firewood, Caleb noticed a framed photo inside her cabin, a wedding picture half hidden under some books. He didn't ask about it, but his eyes softened as if he understood more than she said. Later that night, as she sat by the fire, Emily looked at that same photo. Two people smiling, pretending everything was perfect. She touched the glass gently and whispered, "I tried." Then she placed it inside a drawer, not out of anger, but acceptance. That chapter was over. The next morning, she went outside and saw Caleb's dog waiting by the fence, tail wagging. Caleb followed a moment later, holding a jar of honey. "Made this last summer," he said, handing it to her. "Thought you might like it." She smiled, touched by the small gesture. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said simply. "But it's nice to do something kind now and then." Something about that sentence stayed with her all day. For years, she had measured love through effort, doing things right, saying the right words, keeping the peace. But Caleb's kindness was effortless. He gave because he wanted to, not because he had to. That night, as the stars shone above the quiet mountain town, Emily lay awake, listening to the wind outside. She thought about how strange it was to start over at this age, to rebuild herself from pieces she didn't know still existed. But maybe that was what the mountains were for, to remind people that beauty could come after storms. And somewhere deep in the woods, a man with kind eyes and a patient heart was doing the same, living quietly, helping others, and not realizing that soon, his life too was about to change. Emily didn't know it yet, but the path she had taken to escape her past was slowly leading her toward something unexpected. Not a new love at first sight, but something better. A gentle beginning. A reminder that she didn't have to know how to be perfect. She only had to learn how to let herself be loved. Autumn came quietly to the mountains. The air turned crisp and the trees dressed themselves in shades of gold and amber. Emily loved watching the leaves fall, soft, gentle, and free. It reminded her of how she was learning to let go too. Life had found a slow and steady rhythm.
She painted in the mornings, walked by the river in the afternoons,
And sometimes met Caleb near the trails. Their friendship had become something she looked forward to. Not loud, not demanding, but steady like the mountain wind. Caleb never pushed her to talk, but he listened when she did. He had a way of making her feel safe, even in silence. There was comfort in his presence, and for the first time in years, she began to believe that maybe being loved wasn't about grand words or promises. Maybe it was about kindness that asked for nothing in return. One evening, dark clouds gathered over the valley. By nightfall, a storm rolled in, loud thunder, flashing lightning, and heavy rain that beat against her cabin roof. The wind howled through the trees like an old song. Emily tried to stay calm, but the storm stirred memories she wished she could forget. In the city, storms had made her feel trapped. The noise, the darkness, the coldness. It reminded her of nights when she sat alone, waiting for someone to care that she was scared. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out. The cabin fell into darkness. Emily's heart raced as the wind grew stronger. She lit a candle and wrapped herself in a blanket, trying to stay calm. But every sound and every creak and crash outside there made her flinch. She thought about calling Caleb, but it was late, and she didn't want to bother him. Then, through the roar of rain, there was a knock at her door. She froze for a moment, her heart thudding. When she opened the door, there he was, soaked from head to toe, holding a lantern. "Power's out all across the ridge," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Thought you might need some help." Relief washed over her like warm sunlight. "How did you even know?" He smiled faintly. "You're the only one who doesn't have a generator yet." "Figured I'd check." She stepped aside quickly. "Come in before you catch a cold." He entered, setting the lantern on the table. The soft glow filled the cabin, chasing away the dark corners. Emily couldn't help but notice how at ease he seemed even in a storm. He checked the fireplace, added more wood, and then walked outside briefly to adjust the water line so it wouldn't freeze. When he came back, his hair was dripping and his shirt was damp, but his eyes carried the same calm as always. "You shouldn't have come all this way," she said quietly. "It's dangerous out there," he shrugged. "You do the same." She smiled, though her hands still trembled a little. "I was actually sitting here wondering if I should just wait it out." He looked around, his voice gentle. "Storms don't last forever. They just sound scarier than they are." They sat together by the fire while the storm raged outside. The air was filled with the scent of pine and rain. Emily poured him some hot tea, and for a while neither spoke. The sound of thunder softened, replaced by the steady crackle of the fire. After a long silence, Emily finally said, "Storms used to scare me when I was little. I'd hide under the blanket until they passed." Caleb smiled faintly. "And now?" She hesitated, staring into the flames. "Now they remind me of how small I felt, even as an adult. It's strange, isn't it? You can live with someone for years and still feel invisible." He looked at her quietly, not interrupting. She took a deep breath, her voice low. "I used to try so hard to make him happy. I cooked his favorite meals, smiled even when I wanted to cry, listened to his work stories even when he never asked about mine. But somehow, no matter what I did, it was never enough. I kept thinking maybe if I changed, maybe if I became a better wife, he'd finally love me the way I loved him." Caleb's eyes softened. "That's a heavy way to live, Emily." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. "And when I finally told him I was leaving, he didn't even argue. He just said, 'If that's what you need.' That's when I realized he never needed me at all." For a moment, there was only the sound of the fire. Then Caleb spoke, his voice low and steady. "Maybe he didn't know what to do with a heart like yours. Some people don't recognize love even when it's standing right in front of them." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "I don't know how to be a wife," she whispered. The words came out before she could stop them. Small, broken, but honest. Caleb met her gaze, and for the first time, there was something deep in his eyes. Not pity, but understanding. He leaned slightly forward, his voice calm and warm. "Then let me teach you how to be loved." The words were simple, but they reached straight into her soul. He wasn't promising her anything. He wasn't asking for anything either. He was offering something deeper, a chance to understand what love was supposed to feel like. Gentle, kind, and patient. Emily didn't know what to say. Her heart ached in a way that felt new, not painful but awakening. She looked at him and all she could whisper was, "I don't even know where to start." He smiled softly. "You start by letting yourself be enough." Outside, the storm began to fade. The thunder moved farther away and the rain softened into a quiet drizzle. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed warmly, wrapping them in peace. Caleb stayed until the power returned, fixing the generator before leaving. He didn't say goodbye with big words, just a quiet nod and a promise. "I'll check on you tomorrow." When the door closed behind him, Emily stood there for a long time, her heart full of emotions she couldn't name. She had spent so many years trying to earn love, trying to deserve it, that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply receive it. Caleb hadn't tried to fix her pain. He had simply sat beside it, unafraid. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, watching the embers glow. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside her was slowly settling too. She thought about his words, "Let me teach you how to be loved." They echoed softly in her mind, not as a promise of romance, but as a reminder that love could be kind. In the days that followed, something changed between them, though neither mentioned it. Caleb still visited sometimes, to check on her generator, to bring fresh wood, or to share quiet coffee mornings. But there was a new gentleness in their silences, a shared understanding that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Emily began writing again, small journal entries about her days, her thoughts and the peace she was learning to find. In one entry she wrote, "Maybe love isn't about being perfect for someone. Maybe it's about being seen for who you are, and still being chosen." Each day felt lighter, as if the storm had taken away something heavy from her soul. She didn't know where things with Caleb would go, but she knew one thing for certain. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to be herself, and somewhere deep in the mountains Caleb thought of her too. He smiled quietly to himself, remembering her words, her laughter, the way she looked at the world with gentle eyes despite all she had been through. He didn't need to rush her heart. He knew healing took time. For now, it was enough to know that two hearts, once lost and guarded, had found comfort in each other's quiet company, and that maybe, just maybe, this was how love began, not with fireworks, but with peace. The days grew shorter as winter started to arrive in the mountains. The first snow came quietly one morning, covering the forest in white silence. Emily stood by her window, watching flakes fall slowly from the sky. The whole world looked soft, calm, and untouched, like a new beginning. She smiled faintly, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. It had been months since she'd first met Caleb. What had started as small talks and kind gestures had now become a peaceful part of her life. They didn't need to say much anymore. Their friendship had settled into something gentle, something that didn't need big words to feel real. Caleb came by often, sometimes to bring firewood, sometimes just to check on her. Emily had stopped trying to find excuses for his visits. Deep inside, she knew it wasn't about the firewood anymore. It was about being near each other, about finding peace in someone else's company. One morning, she decided to walk down to his cabin. The snow was deep, but the path between their homes was familiar now. She carried a small basket of cookies she had baked. His dog barked happily when she approached, running circles around her feet. Caleb opened the door, surprised but smiling. "Morning," he said, brushing snow from his coat. "You walked all the way here in this cold?" "I brought cookies," she said with a grin. "That makes it worth it." He laughed softly. "Then I can't argue with that." She handed him the basket and stepped inside, warming her hands by the fire. His cabin was simple, wooden shelves, an old rug, and a few handmade chairs. But it felt alive, filled with the quiet comfort of a life well lived. "Your place feels like a story," she said, looking around. Caleb smiled. "Every mark on these walls has one. I built this place years ago after my father passed. Just me and my hands." "That must have been hard," she said softly. "It was," he admitted, sitting by the fire. "But sometimes building something with your own hands reminds you that life still goes on." no matter what you lose. Emily nodded. She understood that kind of pain. They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea. It was a silence that felt full, not empty. A quiet understanding between two souls who had both been broken, but were learning how to heal. Later that afternoon, the snow thickened outside. Caleb walked her back halfway, his dog bounding ahead. The sky was a dull gray, but Emily didn't feel cold. His steady presence beside her made everything feel safe. When they reached the edge of the forest, she turned to him. "You don't have to keep looking out for me, you know," she said gently. "I'm learning to manage on my own." He looked at her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm not doing it just for you." Her cheeks warmed and she looked away, pretending to adjust her scarf. "Well, then I guess I can't stop you." Caleb chuckled quietly. Didn't plan to stop anyway. In the weeks that followed, their bond grew deeper. They shared little things, meals, jokes, stories about their pasts. Emily found herself laughing more often, sometimes even at small things. The mountains had changed her. She no longer felt trapped by her memories. She had started painting again regularly, and her walls were now filled with colors, skies, rivers, and pine trees. Caleb admired her paintings whenever he visited. "You bring the mountains to life," he said once. "They look softer when you paint them." "They feel softer now," she replied. "Maybe because I'm finally seeing beauty again." As winter deepened, Caleb's cabin roof took a heavy hit during a snowstorm. The next morning, Emily found out from the storekeeper that part of his roof had collapsed. Without thinking twice, she put on her coat and hurried through the snow. When she reached his cabin, he was outside, fixing a broken beam. "You shouldn't be out here," she called. "It's freezing." He turned, surprised to see her. "It's not so bad. The roof won't fix itself." "Well, it won't fix faster if you freeze," she replied, walking up to him. "Let me help." He frowned lightly. "You don't have to—" "Don't start," she interrupted, handing him the hammer. "I know how to follow instructions." He couldn't argue with that. Together they worked quietly, Caleb guiding her while she held the wooden planks in place. Snowflakes fell on their hair, melting slowly. After a while, they managed to secure the broken section. Emily's fingers were numb, but she laughed with satisfaction. "See? Told you I could help." Caleb grinned. "I stand corrected." They went inside, shaking snow from their clothes. Emily made tea while Caleb added logs to the fire. The warmth filled the cabin again, and for a moment it felt like time had slowed down. She looked around at the wooden walls, the small details, a shelf of books, a few carved figurines, a half-finished chair. "You really built all of this?" she asked. He nodded. "Every nail, every board?" "Took years, but it was worth it." She smiled softly. "It's beautiful. You've made a home that feels alive." Caleb looked at her. "You've made one too, Emily, even if you don't realize it yet." She met his eyes, and something warm passed between them. Not the rush of sudden love, but the slow, steady heartbeat of understanding. He wasn't trying to change her. He was simply reminding her of who she already was. As days turned into weeks, Emily found herself visiting more often. Sometimes she helped him with his woodwork. Sometimes they simply talked while snow fell outside. She began to feel stronger, not because he protected her, but because he showed her that she could stand tall on her own. One evening, as they watched the sunset from his porch, Caleb turned to her and said, "You've changed since the day I met you." She smiled, looking at the horizon. "Maybe I just stopped being afraid of myself." He nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes all people need is a little space to remember who they are." His words touched her deeply. "You gave me that space, Caleb." "And you filled it with light," he said quietly. They sat in silence as the sun dipped behind the snowy peaks. Emily felt a calm she hadn't known before. It wasn't the kind of calm that came from being loved by someone else. It was the peace that came from finally loving herself. That night, when she returned to her cabin, she stood before one of her paintings, a new one. It showed two cabins in the snow, light glowing from their windows connected by a narrow trail. She smiled softly. It wasn't just a painting. It was a story. Theirs. Weeks later, when Caleb's birthday came, she carved a small wooden heart and painted a tiny mountain on it. On the back, she wrote, "For teaching me how to find peace." When she gave it to him, he looked at her with quiet gratitude. "You didn't have to make this," he said softly. "I wanted to," she replied. You've done so much for me, and I wanted you to have something that says thank you. Caleb held the small heart in his rough hands. You already did, Emily. Every time you smile. That's enough. She looked down shyly, her heart warm. In that moment, she realized something beautiful. Caleb hadn't just taught her how to be loved by someone else. He had taught her how to love herself again, to see her worth beyond the roles she once tried to fit. The snow outside sparkled under the moonlight, and the mountains stood tall and silent, keeping their secrets. Inside, two people who had once been broken sat together in quiet peace, proof that healing doesn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes it just needs gentle hearts, shared laughter, and time. Emily finally understood that love wasn't about being someone's perfect wife or fitting into anyone's expectations. It was about kindness, trust, and two souls who meet and help each other grow. And as she walked home that night, her heart light and calm, she knew the mountains had given her more than peace. They had given her a reason to believe again. Spring came slowly to the mountains, painting the world in shades of green and gold. The snow melted into streams that danced over rocks, and the air smelled sweet with new blooms. Emily walked along the familiar trail to Caleb's cabin, her boots crunching softly on the damp earth. The world felt alive again, and so did she. It had been months since the first stormy night that changed everything. Since then, Emily had grown in ways she never imagined. She had learned to trust her own heart, to paint her feelings onto canvases, to laugh freely, and to enjoy the quiet companionship of someone who cared without expecting her to be anything other than herself. She felt stronger, lighter, and more whole. Caleb was outside, chopping wood near the cabin. His dog ran circles around him, barking happily at each swing of the axe. When he saw Emily approaching, a smile touched his face, warm, calm, and familiar. "Morning," he called, setting the axe aside. "Morning," she replied, holding a small box in her hands. Her heart pounded slightly. Today she had decided to give him something special, not because she owed him anything, but because she wanted to show her gratitude in the most personal way she could. He noticed the box and raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Emily smiled softly. "A gift. For you." He took the box gently and opened it. Inside was a small wooden heart she had carved herself, smooth and polished, with a tiny painted mountain etched on the front. It was simple, but it carried her feelings and care, admiration, trust, and a quiet love that had grown over the months. "For teaching me how to love again," she said softly. Caleb looked at the heart, then back at her. His eyes softened. "Emily, you didn't have to. I wanted to," she whispered. "You've shown me so much without asking for anything in return. You've helped me find myself again, and I wanted you to know that it means everything." He held the small heart in his hands for a long moment, as if feeling the weight of her words. Then he smiled quietly, the kind of smile that didn't need explanation. "You've already given me more than you know. This is just beautiful." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest. For years she had been unsure if she could be seen for who she truly was. Now, standing there in the gentle sunlight, she realized she finally could, and she finally felt accepted. They spent the morning together, sharing tea and small talk. The dog chased birds in the yard, and the mountains stood silent behind them, their peaks bright with new snow. It was peaceful not because of grand gestures, but because of understanding, a quiet bond that had grown naturally over time. As the day went on, they worked together on small chores, fixing a loose board on the porch, arranging firewood neatly, and planting a few early spring flowers along the edge of the cabin. Emily's hands were busy, her heart light, and for the first time, she felt a sense of belonging. Caleb watched her quietly as she worked, noticing the way she smiled when she succeeded, the way her eyes brightened when she saw a flower bloom, the way she moved with confidence he hadn't seen in her before. He had known her pain, had seen her doubts, but he also knew something else, and she was capable, strong, and kind in ways she hadn't allowed herself to see until now. "You've changed," he said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. Emily paused and looked at him. "I think I've been allowed to," she replied softly. "You didn't tell me what to do. You didn't try to fix me, you just let me be me. That's all anyone can do," Caleb said quietly. "Show up, Care and wait patiently while someone finds their own strength. She smiled, her eyes glistening slightly. I didn't know how to be loved before. Not really. I thought it meant doing everything right, saying everything right, being everything someone else wanted me to be. But you've shown me it's not like that. Love isn't about rules. It's about kindness, patience, and seeing someone for who they really are. He nodded, his gaze steady. And you've learned it well. That's why you're here now and fully yourself without fear. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. She had carried so much doubt and fear for years, thinking she could never measure up, thinking she had failed in ways that couldn't be fixed. But Caleb had never demanded perfection. He had simply chosen to walk beside her quietly, patiently, showing her that she deserved love just as she was. I finally understand, she whispered. I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be me. Caleb's smile was gentle. Exactly. And that is enough. Always enough. The day faded into evening. The sky turned gold and pink, and the mountains reflected the colors like a mirror. Emily and Caleb sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the world grow quiet around them. No one spoke for a long time. Words weren't needed. Their hearts understood each other. At one point, Emily leaned slightly toward him, her hand brushing his. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let her presence settle, warm and comforting. There was no rush, no pressure, just the simple truth of being together, unafraid. You've taught me something important, she said softly. Not just how to accept love, but how to give it too. Not in the way I used to think I had to, but honestly, simply, and from the heart. Caleb nodded. And you've reminded me of something too, that even quiet hearts can heal, and even gentle souls can inspire strength. They sat in silence again, the mountains embracing them, the stars beginning to sparkle as night fell. It was a perfect peace, the kind that doesn't need drama or declarations, just trust, understanding, and a bond that grows steadily over time. Days turned into weeks, and Emily continued to grow. She painted, she laughed, she lived fully in ways she had long forgotten. Caleb remained a constant, a steady presence who neither rushed her heart nor demanded her attention. Their connection was natural, flowing, and deeply nurturing. One morning, as the sun touched the peaks with golden light, Emily realized something remarkable. She didn't need to define herself by a role, a title, or someone else's expectations. She was enough as she was and loved not because she performed, but because she existed, and Caleb had shown her how to recognize that. Later, she visited his cabin one last time before heading home for a short trip to visit the town. She handed Caleb the small wooden heart again, just to see it in his hands one more time. You've changed my life, Caleb, she said quietly. Not because of anything you did for me, but because of everything you taught me. He smiled, looking down at the heart. No, you changed your own life. I just showed you the path. You walked it. Emily's eyes glistened. And it feels good to know I can love and be loved without fear. Exactly, he said. That's what it means to be alive. As she walked home, she felt lighter than she had in years. She had left her old life behind, not because she wanted to escape, but because she had learned that love, real love, starts with kindness, patience, and the courage to be yourself. Caleb watched her from his porch as she walked away, his hands resting on the railing. He didn't need words to know what she felt. He could see it in her posture, the way she walked with confidence, the way her laughter echoed softly through the mountains. He felt a quiet pride, not in what he had done for her, but in who she had become. Emily returned to her cabin that evening, carrying warmth in her heart. She looked at her paintings, some finished, some still in progress, and realized they weren't just art. They were her story, her healing, and her newfound strength. She smiled softly, whispering to herself, I finally know what it feels like to be loved, and to love myself. The mountains stood silent and strong around her, guardians of her journey. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of more gentle days, more quiet lessons, and more peaceful moments. Emily knew that life would continue to test her, that storms would still come, but she also knew that she could face them now, with courage, grace, and a heart open to love. And in the quiet of the night, when the stars glimmered above and the world slept, she thought of Caleb and whispered softly, Thank you for showing me that love can be gentle, patient, and real. Some things didn't need grand gestures, dramatic endings, or loud declarations. Some things, and like the love she had discovered, were quiet, steady, and everlasting, and that was enough.